Well, hello, good morning. Welcome to the 10th of April. Getting halfway through the month. Days are starting to roll out pretty nicely. So I had a game yesterday. I did a bunch of work in the morning and then ended up packing up and going out to one of the high schools nearby and doing one of the varsity boys games, and it went pretty well. In the first half I did pretty well, but towards the end of the first half there was a lot of things that were starting to slide, and I think it was um, maybe me being a little too passive, not blowing the whistle enough. And there's always a fine line with refereeing. You don't want to blow the whistle too often because then the game never really gets a good flow. But the other aspect is you blow the whistle too little, and the players' discipline starts to crumble, and then the game starts getting really messy, and you start seeing more dirty play, more cheap shots, more fouls, a lot more sort of handling errors, and no one wants to see that. So, but I had a mate out there who was able to give me some good advice at half time, and I went back out in the second half and kind of collected it and ended up finishing the game pretty strongly, I think. A couple of minor law issues that I was unclear on. And I always know with those because I'm not confident on every aspect of law in the game. I think the manual's over 300 pages long. But I think in general it went pretty well, and the lads seemed to have a good time, and the coaches seemed pleased with it at the end, so that was good. And then we went out to a bar and had a couple of beers, and those beers were, fucking yay tall. A Hefeweizen beer that they served, and if you've ever watched Euro Trip, the Das Boot, it felt like drinking out of one of those. It had the spirals all the way down it, and I was watching it while I was drinking the last sort of few mouthfuls, and how the beer along the edge of the thing was following the curve of the spirals. And I was like, it's a nice glass. I would have liked to have taken one home. But as a result, after yelling all day or yelling all afternoon at these guys, or play stuff, and having some drinks in the evening, and then coming home, and it being midnight by the time I got back, honestly, I actually don't look too bad considering that I went to bed at midnight, which is 2 hours later than normal. And it's been, I can't even think now. Might be over 3 months, 4 months maybe since New Year's. So yeah, don't think I'm doing too badly, which is hopefully, I believe, a sign that the iron supplements are starting to kick in, and that my fitness and health level is starting to be better reflected. I definitely didn't have any issues running around yesterday. Fitness-wise, I was barely out of breath most of the game, which was nice. I had a couple of good sprints. My legs are feeling a bit shot this morning, but in general, feeling pretty good. Had some interesting conversations though while we were having beers, and one of the ones that I got was about the potential Achilles heel in the book that I wrote, where I sort of try to go into some scientific explanations for the interactions of THC and dopamine in the brain, and from what I assumed was relatively straightforward science, there's actually a lot more in it, and an examination of it from my point of view is the perspective that I got, and the food for thought that I got was, I'm not really qualified to talk about the science of dopamine, and I can throw that in the book, and most people would probably read it and understand the explanation that I've given, but for me to then conjecture about its role in the creation of addiction cycles and that sort of thing is probably a little bit outside of my pay grade, if not a lot outside of my pay grade. So I was given to think about the idea of making it more about a metaphor, and what I realized when I was driving home and kind of mulling that over in my head was that the book largely serves as a communication for my experience with marijuana and the experience that I've observed people close to me dealing with it as well. And it kind of shifted my perspective on how the book would be best accomplished, or rather how the book would be best presented. And then that kind of got me thinking on all the other sort of projects that I have planned, and how if it's not going to be a book on science, convincing people of science that I'm not really an expert in would be a bad idea. And I'm fine with that, because my observations are still pretty consistent with what I believe, at least what I've come to believe about it. And writing from my own point of view is where most of the book came from. So changing that chapter over to make it more about a metaphor, essentially, and the outcomes rather, and the behaviors rather than the chemical interactions, and leaving the chemistry to the scientists, and maybe just taking what I know, which is what I've observed and what I've experienced, and putting that into the book instead, and making the whole book how to quit dope from my perspective, rather than how to quit dope, a definitive guide. I think other people have probably gone the definitive guide route, and that's probably a market, at least from what I've seen, that's a market that's already well saturated with people who've been pseudoscientists and who've done their thing, their surveys and whatever, and I haven't bothered with any of that. Mine comes strictly from what I've observed and what I've experienced, and I've even written into the book that I don't expect that it'll work for everybody, this approach, but for the people who pick it up and do read it, and for who it resonates with, if it's from my own perspective, then it might actually be a more useful book to people. So yeah, so anyway, long story short, it was another one of those break down preconceived notions about what you've done that was good, what I've done, something that I've done that I thought was going pretty good, and kind of reevaluate it from a different perspective, and that was useful. To push back, of course, on it was kind of nice though, because I did push back and say that I felt that if science was explained in a simple way, it didn't matter who was saying it necessarily, and I think I was able to get that point across. Of course, the science that I'm trying to push in that particular chapter some of it is speculative, and so that was the issue with there. But in general, saying saying what goes up must come down, is you get into the physics of that. You don't have to be a physician or a physicist to talk about the details of gravity and that sort of thing. But once you start using gravity as a mechanism for explaining, weather, for example, or I don't know, cement pouring dynamics, then you need to be an expert. And that's what I understand, is that he was sort of giving me the idea, or at least giving me the good instruction, that using the science that I was trying to do to explain internal mechanisms that are not consistent across people is not a good way to go about doing it, because it's easily pulled apart, and sticking with metaphors and personal experience is a much better way to go, unless you're planning on going into the study of it. So yeah. Boring video, I know, boring topic, but interesting to me, because it is food for thought, and it's interesting to also consider the idea that the things that we believe are universal truths or universal explanations for things oftentimes are not, and that people's experiences are going to be different across the board. And you can make generalizations, and you can make some generalizations safely, I think. But when you try to make those generalizations stick to everyone within those groups, you're going to have trouble, because there are so many different things that cause people to take on behaviors. So yeah. I think we see that a lot when it comes to the question of race, how easy it is for people to sort of assign behaviors or activities to certain people of race, whether it's all white people are bad, or all black people are criminals, or all Asians are good at math, or whatever your thing is. There's a much deeper conversation that needs to be had in that instance, and generalizing that, using that mechanism, that internal mechanism of stereotype, whatever it is, okay, let's say white people are all bad. Okay, it's because we did these things in the past, and you look at white people in society and they're on the top of the pyramid and whatever else. Using those observations to then explain away a whole nother social issue it's faulty, and it's dangerous, because it's what creates these weird generalizations. So anyway, excuse me. But otherwise, been feeling pretty good. Had some interesting conversations on Reddit with some people who are quitting, giving some decent advice, seeing some other people's perspectives, which has been nice, and learning to not be as judgy or as harsh or as acerbic, and I think that's useful as well. Anywho, it's time for me to go get ready to go train some friends of mine, so that'll be it for me. Ka kite.